All right, everybody, it's Saturday night. Welcome back. You're listening to America Now. I'm Barb Adams. Thanks so much for joining me. As always, I've got a great show lined up for you, beginning with an in-depth look into the big business of Tele-Evangelism in Hour 1. Then in Hour 2, the editor of the Good Men Project's Dad and Families page joins me to discuss modern fatherhood and men's changing roles. Finally, in honor of Women's History Month here in March, we'll learn about the forgotten women behind the world's great men in Hour 3. I hope you stay for the entire show, but if you do miss any part, you can listen in anytime on my website, RadioAmericanow.com, under archives. Well, Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, said, "Writing for a penny a word is ridiculous. If a man really wanted to make $1 million, the best way would be to start his own religion." Well, we all know the rest of that story. Today's evangelists may not be as creative as Hubbard, but they have certainly learned how to profit, turning the prosperity doctrine into big business and even bigger dollars for themselves. Joining me now to discuss this growing trend of tele-evangelism is author and former statewide prosecutor and deputy attorney general of New Jersey, John J. Higgins. Together, John and I have formed the nonpartisan Practical Solutions for America, and we ask you to join us here on air each week and on our new Facebook page to work together to find common ground in discussing and solving the challenges in present-day America. If you'd like to join tonight's discussion, give us a call, 800-259-5791. Again, that's 800-259-5791. John, happy spring. How you doing?
Good, Barb. How are you?
I'm doing well. Great weather here. No complaints. John, today many of the Christian and spiritual leaders are rolling in obscene amounts of money based on their teachings regarding prosperity. I don't know about you, but prosperity doesn't quite equate to worshiping the almighty dollar only. Your thoughts?
Well, the surprising thing to me about it all is that the religion that they basically rely on all the time is Christianity, which is so far afield from what the Bible talks about in terms of the life of Christ. And they've been able to twist and turn that around by taking different passages from the Bible and reconfiguring the entire argument that Christ or God wants people all to be wealthy and prosperous, providing that they send money into whatever their TV channel is.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not even TV channels anymore sometimes. They're in the churches. They've got the big TV screens. Yeah, televangelism is taking on a whole new form. It's trickling down even from that level to the everyday, even in the regular churches. They're all offering classes on prosperity or this and that, at least even in the spiritual New Thought movement especially, which I'm more familiar with at this point. They're charging ridiculous amounts of money for classes that are teaching you things that are kind of the everyday, and that should not be for sale, personally. This information, if it's coming supposedly from God or from the Bible or whatever, I'm not sure they should be charging for this. It just doesn't seem right.
Well, I think the basic model that really all comes from is what the Catholic Church was like for 2,000 years. The idea that you tithe and you give a certain percentage of your money into a church or whatever, and they take the money, and I guess the model is supposedly that they will then dispense it for the poor and the meek. But what seems to be happening is that whoever is the best snake oil salesman seems to be able to keep, the majority of the money, and they don't live lives of poverty. They live lives that are extremely, of the super wealthy.
Oh, yes. Many of these, the bigger name ones, the Kenneth Copelands, and I know now Osteen, and what's his name, Creflo Dollar out of Atlanta. I mean, these people we're talking billionaires, and a lot of them before this have turned into millionaire and billionaires, and so have their heirs. And it's just really interesting because I thought originally, weren't the churches supposed to be not-for-profit?
Well, that's a whole other thing that happens in the corporate world. It's like the super scam that happens with corporations is that you can designate yourself as a not-for-profit, so then you don't have to pay taxes, and like a normal corporation for those that do pay taxes, or an individual. So it's turned out to be like a real refined twist on the whole corporate model. So they're basically tax exempt. They don't have that money disappearing from them, contributed back into the government. They get to keep it.
Yeah, and keep it they do. We were talking about, I mentioned Dollar here. What was it, 3 or 4 days ago? He went to his parishioners, and he's soliciting donations for some $60 to $65 million because he needs a new jet. His old jet is, 1984. Oh, well, golly, these guys, it's just... It's obscene. That's the only word I can keep using on all of this. Because do they really need these types of things? And what is it about the flock that they continue to allow themselves to be fleeced like this?
Well, I was in shock about raising the $65 million for the jet. Most of his parishioners, I think he wanted $300 from 200,000 people. And, when I was reading that, I was going, well, okay, kind of goofy, a little bit of chiseling kind of stuff going on. But then I realized when I looked he already had a jet.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, what does the leader of one of these churches need a private jet for?
Well, not only him, Kenneth Copeland, he has his own private airport. He's got a whole fleet of jets for himself and his family, and he built an entire religious empire by teaching that God wants his followers to prosper. Well, obviously, he and his family have certainly prospered as billionaires now.
Well, I'm thinking that maybe that's really, I used to joke that the Pope had a teletype to God himself, and the message would get sent to him. I guess maybe if you're in a private jet flying at 35,000 feet, that you're closer to God and you're closer to the source.
Well, maybe that's it. Closer to thee, my Lord. And they can bring it back down to the earth when they land and share it with the parishioners at that point. They can share the information, but definitely not the prosperity.
Right, and the shame of it is that there's many people who are sending that money in that are really in desperate straits, and they're trying to get onto this prosperity wavelength, I guess, or gravy train, that by sending money into them, there's some kind of thought that that God will reward them for sending in this money somehow, when that's really not the way any of it works.
Yeah, and I've taken courses in some of the churches I've been associated with, and many of them, like prosperity classes. And first you're charged to be a part of the prosperity class, to get the materials and all these types of things. Then you sit there and you listen to the videos, and you look in the books, and every other word is tithe, and not meaning tithe of your service, your time, those types of things, definitely meaning the money. More the better, and the more you give, the more you'll get, supposedly, in return. I'm not sure how that quite works, though, when you're giving all your money, and if you don't have a whole lot to begin with. So we're heading to a break here, John. So when we come back, let's talk about this, because I think a lot of people have been led down a false path, believing that if they give what little they have left, they're really going to get a major return from God for it. All right, America Now returns after the break. Stay with us. All right, welcome back, everybody. You're listening to America Now. John Higgins and I are talking Tele-Evangelism this hour here. And John, I don't know, it's just, there's so many things that seem so wrong about this whole idea of tele-evangelizing. I know it's been investigated. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, the problem always is when you're trying to investigate churches and religions from a governmental perspective, you always have a constitutional problem because, the separation of church and state. I think they really need to focus more in terms of corporate, investigation kind of things. And, part of the problem with all of this is that people are willingly sending in their money. It's kind of hard to, say that there was any kind of fraud. One of the things that wasn't an American televangelist, it was some kind of conference they had in one of the African countries where they were promising prosperity, and if the attendees would give them $1,000, they'd be promised getting back $1 million or $1 billion within a couple of days. But they only had 2 minutes. There was a 2-minute window for them to put their money in. So they all had their credit cards out, pumping the money in. And it says to me that, there's a desperation in people when they're looking for, it's like pyramid schemes. Not even pyramid schemes. There's nothing going out. It's just going in.
Yeah, it's hope. They're buying hope.
Yeah, exactly, and they're so desperate that they put this money into these things, and then when they walk away, the real sad part, or the sin part to me, is that they think there's something they've done wrong.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. Kenneth Copeland was big on this one. He actually preached that the prosperity gospel, and he claimed that there was something wrong with people if they would tithe or send their money in. And if they didn't get the money back, if they were truly good Christians and they didn't become rich, it was their fault. I mean, this is someone preaching this.
Right. And the problem is that I don't know how you get to the content of what gets taught, but I think that if we put the right restrictions in on these not-for-profits so that they are under more tight scrutiny and control, I mean, the whole not-for-profit thing, there's a lot of not-for-profits out there where they do really wonderful work, and, they take the money and they put it in the right place. But then you have a lot of these not-for-profits where they're taking in a lot of money and they're paying their CEOs, $1 million a year or $500,000 a year or whatever. Red Cross that time with Elizabeth Dole. I mean, that was just absolutely insane that they're paying that kind of money for a salary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to think that these people at the churches are making even more than that. I mean, many of them were talking in the millions and the $1 million plus homes. You have to really wonder, because the money that's given to them, that they use personally, think about how much that truly is. That we're talking billions and billions. If they really wanted to truly be of service in God's name, they could turn that around. They could do so much good. There, clean water, food for people around the world, helping build schools, improving living conditions in so many parts of the world. So much good could come from this. And I think that's what is the worst part for me, is that so many of the people give their money from their heart. They really are good people, and they believe that they're doing good and being of service by tithing or giving to the churches and to these people who are the leaders of these huge churches. And then their money just goes into another jet, an even bigger home, a seaside mansion or whatever. Rolls Royces, private jets, the list goes on and on and on with what they keep for themselves.
Well, we even had that in New Jersey with the Catholic Church. We had some bishop here who he was looking for a new building fund or whatever. He was getting ready to retire, and he was already living in a multi-million-dollar house. He wanted to put another extension on as he was going to retire with a swimming pool and everything else. Finally, the upper levels with this new pope, pulled the reins in on that. I mean, that's not what these, at least to me, these are not what those jobs are supposed to be. When there's ministers and, preachers and priests that are really with their heart in the right place and they're trying to help others, it's not about becoming wealthy on your own.
Yeah, it isn't. And unfortunately, these type of people, the ones that are getting all the attention, and in this growing group of Tele-Evangelists and those out there doing this type of thing, it's really harming those who truly are serving and trying to do good in this world.
Right. And the one thing that seemed to be a common denominator in these Tele-Evangelists or this prosperity church kind of thing is they're not tied to any real established, Christian branch of the religion. They're all off on their own. So they're really not being monitored or accountable to anyone in an upper level to make sure that what they're teaching is really, Christ-based, if you wanted to be Christian.
Yeah, that's true. Good point. What I find interesting, too, is as soon as somebody starts investigating some of these people, they actually get pretty mean about it. I don't know if you heard about the Benny Hinn one. He's the one with the $10 million seaside mansion, private jets, Mercedes, and, you know, he goes on crusades that cost about $3,000 a night overseas in all the good places, Cancun, Hawaii, and all that. Well, somebody called him on it, and he literally turned around on them and said, you know, sometimes I wish God would give me get this, a Holy Ghost machine gun. I'd blow your frickin' head off. I mean, I'm thinking, this man actually said this. He didn't even care that he said this. Blow your frickin' head off with a Holy Ghost machine gun. Okay, then.
well, I have to say he did not aim as high as what he was doing with raising money, because he should have asked for a nuclear device. But, you know, the thing that was shocking to me when I was looking into it, there's actually restrictions on how the IRS investigates these groups. They have turned the tax code into their own benefit. They have something that to conduct civil tax inquiries and examinations of churches. They can only begin it if an appropriate high-level treasury official reasonably believes, on the basis of facts and circumstances recorded in writing, that the organization claimed to be a church or convention or association of churches may not qualify for an exemption. I mean, we're tying their hands to look in at their books.
Wow. Yeah. They've got the deck stacked just like the corporations do, and they're running them. That's it. You were correct, John, in the beginning, to compare them to corporations. That's exactly what they're doing. They are running huge corporations. All right, America Now continues after the break. Stay with us. All right, everybody, welcome back. John Higgins and I tonight discussing the lifestyles of the rich and famous televangelists. And there are plenty of them out there. And again, John, you know, they really have set themselves up like corporations. And it's not just, you know, in Christianity. As I mentioned before, it's a new thought. And there's one particular person I'm thinking about, not going to name her, but a number of years ago, she and her husband basically were found guilty of embezzling $10 million from their church and struck a plea deal to get around it. Her husband went to church and she was able to stay out of church that way. Just reorganized her corporation, and is still out there teaching these prosperity principles, doing the same thing. You know, they get slapped on the hand, they just reform their corporation and go on about their business, literally.
Well, I think part of the problem is that somehow in the United States, you know, since the corporations have become a person, according to Citizens United, we are handling corporations with like kid gloves, which is basically nonsensical to me. You know, part of the problem as a prosecutor, I can tell you, is that when you're going to go after a corporation, is that you have to weigh whether you're going to put, you know, thousands of people out of work or whatever. So you're trying to find some other way of punishing them by, you know, fining them or making them pay some kind of penalty. But that's clearly not working in today's operations. Years ago, when we were doing, you know, drug-free school zones and all of that, we were trying to get to the point that we were putting mandatory prison sentences in, which have backfired over the years. But the goal was to make sure that, you know, dealing drugs and going, you know, to prison or just paying fines for short periods of time wasn't just the cost of doing business. You really needed to clobber them so that it would kill them, and you had to take the head of it out. And I think that's part of the problem when you're not putting, you know, the corporate leaders, you know, the people who really make the decisions that become, you know, a parasite upon society, putting them in prison and punishing them appropriately.
Right. Instead, we give them bailouts, as witnessed back during the last economic downturn.
Right. Or we put monitors on them, as it's happened in New Jersey, that, you know, there was a problem with one of the hospitals, put, you know, a monitor on there that they had to pay this law firm $1 million a year. Of course, it happened to be that the law firm was run by the former U.S. Attorney General, and
wow.
the deal was cut by the U.S. Attorney at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody's just kind of in on it, aren't they? You know, what I think is interesting, though, is when you think back about the entire evolution of the church. You know, it began way back when as a movement, then eventually became a philosophy and an institution, like in Rome. And finally, when it made it to America, it's really become big business. We've just taken it to a totally different level. And I think it's really sad when you look at it from that perspective.
Well, and the saddest part of it is that, these mega churches, and, that's like a subgroup of the Tele-Evangelists to me, because they go broader. They're not always the scammers to that degree. But, there's a thirst, I think, in American society for finding some kind of spiritual, leadership. And up till now, or at least when I was growing up, the churches were pretty firmly established. You went to church on Sunday. You did those kinds of things. Those things are all off today. And people are floundering trying to find some kind of spiritual guidance. And these things are flashy. They're, high tech, and they pull people right in.
And they say what people want to hear, because people right now, with the problems in the economy and with the job market down and people just struggling, people are scared, and when people are in fear, they're not able to think as clearly, and they're looking for safe haven somewhere. Instead of going within themselves, they start looking outside immediately. And here's all these people offering them God's Word. And God's Word is be prosperous, and be prosperous by giving us your money.
No, absolutely. And, some of the political movements, piggyback right on top of that, if you're a Christian, that you should be, looking to worship money and not certainly not the role model of what Christ was.
No, exactly not. And what happened with separation of church and state? Where did that go? We seem to have blurred that line.
Well, that was a double-edged sword, or a two-pronged thing, in that a lot of the far religious right in the churches were starting to do political advocacy. And yeah, there is a line in terms of political contributions that they can't give money to a particular candidate, but that still doesn't mean they're not pumping money in on some kind of political question that aligns, with the platform of the person who's running.
Yeah, we know that all too well, that certain issues just keep coming up over and over and over. It seems every election cycle.
Well, we're debating all the time abortions, which, the Supreme Court decided 40, 50 years ago at this stage, and then we're constantly going over that. We've been going through, the marriage issue, that, a lot of states have decided differently than what a lot of the religious groups have been propounding, and we just don't want to let go of those things because the politicians certainly don't want to focus on the real problems.
Oh, no, because they'd have to tell you how they might solve them, right? And they don't have any answers. They don't have any better answers. In fact, they may have less answers than all of us, which is why we put Practical Solutions for America together. We're trying to get people to talk, because I think that's where we're going to have to change things from, this groundswell movement.
Right. And the problem is that they do have an answer. Give me more money.
Well, yeah. Well, John, we've got it wrong.
Yes.
We're doing this wrong, John. Practical Solutions for America. Give us money.
Stop taxing the upper class, because, they don't want to have to pay, because, they keep playing in this percentage thing, or how much money that they're doing one versus the other to confuse everybody, when in reality, if you're paying a certain percentage in the middle class, or as you're sinking in today's economy, you need every dollar of that. When you have, you're pulling in $10 million or $100 million, or you're a billionaire, you don't need all of that money. So it's not a desperate situation for you at all.
No, yeah, a totally different situation, and they can't relate. There's also this separation where that upper 1% can no longer relate to the lower 99%, and with that inability to relate, unfortunately, that's really a bad situation, because if we go, they go, and they're probably going to go first, as you keep pointing out.
Yes, absolutely. And the other thing is that it kind of aligns back into this prosperity religious movement, in that if you're poor, it's because you're either lazy or God doesn't love you.
Yeah,
and
you chose
those
this.
are not the factors.
Or you're told you chose this. That's the one that gets me a lot of, in a lot of these prosperity things. You choose what you get. And, if you just are a good person, like you're saying, John, and then people are even further maligned. They're already not feeling worthy at some level, because most people haven't done that inside job and worked on themselves. So they're already feeling less than to have your pastor tell you, well, you're not getting rich because you're just not a good person.
Right.
Wow.
And you're supposed to be, if you're poor, you're supposed to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right?
Right.
And somehow create, I guess, the next widget or whatever, because there are no jobs.
Well, I guess you have to go get your own Holy Ghost machine and take out a bank or something. But, oh, dear. All right. America Now continues after the break. All right, everybody, welcome back. You're listening to America Now. John Higgins and I are talking tele-evangelism in America today and prosperity. And John, you go back and you go to the original source. As I mentioned before, what began once as a movement is now a big business. It didn't. The apostles, Jesus, they weren't flying. Well, of course, they didn't have all that back then, but I don't remember them having a lot of prosperity in money sense.
Not at all, but there was a lot of prosperity then. Rome took gold from every place it went. There was plenty of money. Jesus could have went to Rome and become an emperor if that's what he was about. I kind of look in terms of his followers, the apostles. They really were the ones who established the church, because, Christ came, did his thing, and then he ascended into heaven, depending on whether you believe that or not. But after that, he was gone. It was the guys that were left that really spread the church. And I think of it in terms of, if they were the closest to the founder of the church, they would have been the most loved of the group. So they all should have been wealthy if the prosperity movement, was really what it was about. And I studied, Roman history pretty extensively, and I've never seen any of their names appear as a proconsul or as a Crassus with all the gold or whatever. And I took a little bit of time, and I looked into some of the things that happened to them. Judas, of course, hung himself, right?
Right.
James, who was the son of Zebedee, there was a couple of them, he was executed by Herod around 44. Peter and Paul were both martyred in Rome around 66. Paul was beheaded. Peter was crucified. He was crucified upside down at his own request, because he thought that he wasn't worthy to be crucified the same way that Christ was.
Right.
Andrew, he was said to be crucified in Greece. Doubting Thomas, he was pierced with 4 spears in India. Philip, he was cruelly put to death because he had converted the wife of a Roman proconsul. So I guess that was kind of counter their prosperity movement. Matthew, he was a tax collector. He was stabbed to death in Ethiopia. Bartholomew, he was killed in a variety of different ways depending on the reports. James, this is another James, the Jewish historian Josephus, he was stoned and clubbed to death. Simon the Zealot, he was killed after refusing to sacrifice the sun god. Matthias, he and Andrew were, I guess, burned to death. And then John, who supposedly wrote Revelation, he kind of skipped the nasty death, but he was exiled to one of the islands. And I don't think it was, the Cancun or Atlantis down into the Bahamas where they had placed him. So if Christ himself, who was the people closest to him, none of them became rich or wealthy or even had that as a goal, where does this come from other than self-greed and manipulation?
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And that's my thoughts about all of this. Buyer beware. We've been led down a path again. And this fleecing of the flock is big time business. And maybe that's what people need to realize. You need to sit there and really look at the person who's supposedly leading you or teaching you, just as you would a politician or anything else you would get into business-wise. You really need to be wise about your choices that you make. Because if this person's standing in front of you telling you to tithe or bring in your money and give more and more and more, I need a brand new jet or whatever for the church, or for whatever, for your own good, though. It will, they always somehow word it back for your own good, for your own prosperity. You really need to beware and learn to discern.
Yeah, well, that's the way that you will earn the love of God, which is absolutely ludicrous. And like you say, if you're looking at people who are running around in $26 million mansions, in private jets being driven in Rolls Royces and Bentleys, while you're scraping together, trying to keep your family together, feeding them, put food on the table and that kind of thing, they certainly aren't the people you should be following, particularly if you're following a religion that basically says nothing here on the earth is really, gaining riches is really not important at all.
Right.
It's how we treat one another, not gaining more stuff. I would say, if you looked at God in a bigger sense, everything here is nothing but dust. He doesn't care whether you have mansions or doesn't have mansions. He cares how you treat other people. This stuff's going to come and go and churn, and 1,000 years from now, most of the stuff we see today will long be gone.
Exactly, including all these very, quote, rich people that made money off of others. Wonder what will happen to them. That's really interesting because they're doing this in, quote, God's name.
Well, particularly if they believe what they're preaching, at some point they're going to be held accountable for it.
Yeah, I hope so. And that's what we all should be doing, holding all of these people accountable. Right.
And I always go back to look, there's some ways fraud can be committed upon you. So I don't want people to blame themselves if they've had their credit card stolen or somehow they've been duped into something that was really complex or whatever. But generally, you can't treat somebody who's honest. Anytime you think that you're going to get something for nothing, it's usually a very bad sign. I always said this to people: if you're stealing cars and you're selling them, and you found a real good buyer, 9 chances out of 10 it's one of my undercover state troopers or detectives. Same thing if you're planning on murdering somebody or looking for a hitman. Generally, it's one of my guys because they don't exist the way you think they exist. And the same thing goes with this. If you think you're going to give, a church $1,000, you're going to get $1 million back. It's never going to work that way.
So is this sort of when people are asking for a sign? This is the sign they should be looking for.
Right.
There's your sign, folks. If it seems too good to be true, even in the established religious church or whatever it is you're dealing with, probably too good to be true is correct.
Yes. And if you really, to me, the biggest lesson from Christ was that, God lives within all of us. We didn't need a rabbi. We didn't need a priest to communicate with God. That was the lesson I got of what I read from him. You don't need these preachers.
The temple, the church is within each and every one of us. And each and every one of us is accountable to ourselves and to God. We have a direct line.
Right.
Our thoughts, our words, our actions, all of that. All of that.
So you don't have to climb to the top of the highest mountain. You don't need to be in a jet. I believe God is all around us, and he is. I don't know how else to do it, but
the God goddess.
Yeah, I mean to say it is not.
Yeah, no, that kind of
not particularly respectful, but. And if he's guiding you into this kind of thing that you think that money is the end goal on this planet, I think somehow you've really missed the whole message.
Yeah, I believe the message is love. Simply love. There is nothing more powerful than love. That's it. And God is love. You know, they teach God is love. Well, isn't that what we should all be working towards? Love, loving one another, loving your fellow humanity, being of service and showing love that way, not trying to take money from somebody else, not trying to get money to build bigger churches to supposedly honor God.
Well, the other thing I do, and then maybe this is more of a reflection of me than anything else, when I look up at the sky and I see tens of millions of stars or whatever, I know that there's very little here on the earth that is really of any great value. It's just another commodity or whatever there's plenty of them throughout the universe. And at the end of the day, when we die, we're not staying here anyway. So, you know, if you can get all the millions of dollars you want, but it doesn't mean anything in the general sense of things.
Yeah, it's the great evener, isn't it? When we die, everybody's in the same place. We all get evened out. None of that goes with us. John, we're out of time. Unfortunately, thanks again for joining me. And here's hoping that people learn to love one another. All right, everybody, stay tuned. America Now continues after the top of the hour.